Hi class, this is Dr. Karsten, and tonight I want to go over some tricks for comparing fractions less than 1. They're tricks, shortcuts, or just ways of comparing 3 different types of fractions that are all less than 1. I will be doing more work with fractions greater than 1 in another video. We've already started those in our class, but for now, let's just work on this. So if I'm comparing fractions less than 1, the first kind of fraction that I want to talk about is one where my numerators are the same size. So for example, if I had 1/3 and 1/6, this is a really easy compare. And the reason that this is so easy to compare is because they have numerators that are the same size. So again, this is for fractions where numerators are the same size. My numerator here is 1, my numerator here is 1. Just look at the denominators. So here my denominator is 3 and here it's 6. What I can do is I can ask myself, which of these is bigger pieces? And we keep asking ourselves that. Remember, the denominator represents the number of pieces that makes up one whole. So if my one whole is cut up into 3 pieces, those pieces are a lot bigger than if it's cut up into 6 pieces. Watch this. Here's one whole. Here's one whole. I'm going to cut these pieces up into 3 equal pieces. These, however, are 6 equal pieces. And you can see that these pieces are a lot smaller than these pieces. And if I was going to be shading our fraction, I would grab my pencil, which somehow got really far away from me, and this would be 1/3, and this would be 1/6, and you can see it's a lot less. Similarly, if let's say I had 3 sevenths and 3 halves or seconds. If I looked at this, again, my numerator is the same, they're both 3, so I have 3 pieces. In this case, they're sevenths, and in this case, they're seconds or halves. So these are going to be bigger pieces because, again, if I cut something up into 2 pieces, each piece is a whole lot bigger than if I were cutting it up into, oops, I did a bad job there, I apologize. They're not going to be really even, but you can still get the idea that they're much smaller. Now in this case, actually, we could have even said this was greater than 1 and this is less than 1, but we'll get to that in another video. That's not this video. For the purposes of this one, if the numerators are the same size, look for which denominator gives you larger pieces. Here, this guy's definitely bigger, just like up here, this guy would have been bigger. Okay, so that's one kind. That's when we have numerators that are the same size. Now let's take a look at when our denominators are the same size. And those might actually be even better or easier to work with, or an easier concept, I should say. So I'm trying to get this out of our way. There we go. I'm having like a lot of lag in the video. I'm not really sure why. I know that I've made sure that my system's up and running well, so I apologize if there's a little lag in there. But hopefully this all makes sense. Okay, so now let's talk about when our denominators are the same size. So let's say that I had 1/5 and 4/5. Well, here what you know is that my denominators are telling you that my sizes of my pieces are exactly the same thing. And here I have 1 of them, and there I have 4 of them. Remember, something I've been saying a lot is that these are just labels, and they're the label that tells you how big your pieces are. So yeah, it's telling us how many pieces are in one whole, but it's also just telling us the size of the piece. So here I can say I have 1 of those pieces. Here I can say I have 4 of those pieces. And if I wanted to draw that really quickly, and I find that the tape diagrams work better for these kinds of things, so that's why I'm not using the number line. So you can see that both my tape diagrams are divided into fifths. Now in this one, I'm going to do 1/5, which means I'm just going to shade in 1. The numerator tells us how many we have, or how many are shaded in. And this one I'm going to do 4. So I would actually shade those 4. And you can see it's a lot more. And that's, again, a shortcut would be that if your denominator is the same size, look at the numerator. You have more of this sized pieces. Okay, so I think that one's pretty easy. So now the last one is one where we really don't have that kind of a shortcut to work with. And that would be like a problem. I'm kind of running out of room because my table is covered in manipulatives and all sorts of stuff. So I'm trying to shade this, trying to move this up. So let's do an example like this, where I have 4/6 and 1/4. When you have a problem like this, my numerators are different, my denominators are different, I don't have that same kind of a shortcut, so this is where our benchmarks come in. And I want to remind everyone that benchmarks for fractions less than 0 are going to be, sorry, less than 0 makes no sense. Benchmarks for fractions less than 1, I was just thinking about what I had to write, are going to be 0, 1/2, and 1. And again, this is a quick review, so I'm not going into all the things about benchmarks that I've done in previous videos. They're still sitting out there waiting for you to explore them if you need them. But for this one, I'm going to use these benchmarks, and I'm going to talk about the relation of these fractions to those benchmarks. We want to talk about where they're located, and the best way to talk about that, to explain it and teach it, is to use a number line. So I'm going to put my benchmarks on here. I have 0, I have 1/2, and I have 1. And what I'm going to want to do is figure out where do these go on the benchmarks. So let's try 4/6 to start with. And a little trick that I've given you guys is to turn these benchmarks into those fractions to really help you visualize it. So for example, when I'm at 0, I have 0 of anything. So in this case, it would be 0/6 would go right here. So if I'm looking at my 6th, if I'm turning all these benchmarks into 6th, I would have 0 of them here. This is going to be 0 of anything. Now over here is another really easy one. That's just going to be 6/6. So that's going to be like a super duper easy one to remember. Is you're always going to have a numerator and denominator the same thing, because if it's divided into 6 pieces and I have all 6 pieces, that's equal to 1. Now for the half, just remember, I'm going to need to figure out what is half of 6, and half of 6 is 3. So I know that 3/6 and 1/2 are equivalent fractions. This is how I would show it in 6th. So now if I look at my fraction 4/6, I can see that it is going to go between 1/2 and 1, because it's going to fall between 3 of this size pieces and 6 of those pieces, between 3/6 and 6/6. And if I wasn't sure where it was going to go, I could quick jot in my numbers. I could put 4 in here and 5 in here and say, oh look, it's going to be between 3/6 and 6/6, closer to the 3/6. And I'm going to put that one in here. And more specifically, what I could say is that 4/6 is actually 1/6 greater than 3/6. And that's something we've been really working on a lot lately. So I'm going to go ahead and jot that down here just to reinforce that. 4/6 is 1/6 greater than 1/2. You also could have simply said that it was between 1/2 and 1, closer to 1/2. That's another thing. This is more specific, but another option would have been to say that 4/6 is between 1/2 and 1, closer to 1/2. All right, so now let's get that 1/4 on there. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn my benchmarks into fourths just to help me understand it. And when I do that, I'd have 0/4 here, because it's always going to be 0. I'd have 4/4 here, and I'm sorry I'm squishing it in. And then here, half of 4 is 2. So 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. So now 1/4 is going to go between 0/4 and 2/4. So one of these sized pieces will go between 0 of them and 2 of them. And it's actually going to go right in between, like perfectly in between. And I could write that. 1/4 is halfway between 0 and 1/2. Sorry that was so choppy. Anyway, so 1/4 is halfway between 0 and 1/2, because that's where it is. So this is a basic review of how to figure out fractions that are less than 1 and how to work with them. You will either have fractions that have the same numerator, and you can just compare the denominators and look for the bigger sized pieces. You will have fractions that have the same denominator, and then you can see how many of those sized pieces you have in the numerator. Or you're going to have fractions that are going to have different numerators and different denominators, And then you're going to have to use benchmarks. And if you need to, you can use a number line. Again, here I could have guessed that 4 was bigger than half of 6, so I would have been able to right away say, oh, hey, look, that one's going to be bigger. And I just realized I never wrote this one in for you guys either, even though I did it verbally. So now they're in there. Now, because I can't resist, and because I know benchmarks are tricky for you guys, sorry about that. The one other thing that I really quickly want to review with you, which I review in like every video, because I need you guys to really get it, are those fifths and those thirds. So really super quickly, going to show them to you. Here are my benchmarks. Now, that 1/2, I'm not going to put it in there yet, because first I want to divide this into fifths, just so you guys can see where they would fall about. Okay, that was really awful, but it's good enough for what we're doing. So I'd have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and this would be 5/5, and this would be 0/5. And what I want to remind you of is that if I were to divide this in half, that's where my half is. So this is my 1/2 benchmark, but I'm keeping it up there for this. So what you can see here now is that both 1/5 and 2/5 are between 0 and 1/2, those two benchmarks, but 1/5 is closer to 0, 2/5 is closer to 1/2. You can also see that both 3/5 and 4/5 are between 1/2 and 1, but 3/5 is closer to 1/2, while 4/5 is closer to 1. So remember, those were our benchmarks there. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that, and I'm going to do the third also, thirds for you really quick, because again, these are the ones that are a little tricky for a lot of you. So I want to make sure you're really comfortable. So I have my 0, I have my 1, and I'm going to cut this into thirds. So I have 1/3 and 2/3, and then I'm going to extend this half mark, or put my half line there. So that's 1/2. So as you can see, there's still thirds, 1, 2, 3. You can see that 1/3 is between 0 and 1/2, and that 2/3 is between 1/2 and 1. Okay, so that's that for this video. It's a nice and quick one. So again, tricks for comparing fractions less than 1. You have your 3 tricks. Well, really, it's just ways of doing it. When the numerators are the same, denominators are the same, or when they're not, and you have to use your benchmarks, and if you need a number line. Have a great night, everyone. I will see you in our Google Classroom.